So now we're going to pass to Kevin.
Okay, I'm here.
Mhm.
I'm going to
Yes.
try to share the screen. Okay.
Lisa, can you come to
So I just really have two slides, and I think I can get through what I need to say pretty quickly, just to respect the time, because I think we're finishing up at 5:30. Is that correct?
No, we extended it by half an hour, so you're
Oh,
good.
okay. So, so the first slide, first thing I need to say is I do not identify as Native American, but I do work with the Native community very, very closely in a lot of projects. So I feel comfortable to talk about the theory of decolonizing sustainability. And what I mean by that is to make it less Western Eurocentric focused, make it less privilege focused. And an example of that is people encouraging folks to buy expensive cars like a Prius because it saves a lot of gas. A lot of people, and especially in communities of color, can't afford cars like that. They can't afford to put solar panels on their houses. They can't afford a lot of things. And they see the university as being very, oh, excuse me for the crows, they're hanging out in the backyard here. They see the university as being very Eurocentric and developing theories like permaculture, and then trying to explain it to Native people. And Native people said, well, we were living in unison with the environment all along, so we don't need to be taught that. That's what we did. So I put up this, what's called a medicine wheel. I'm not going to go through the whole thing now, but it's just one of the philosophies that some Native people use to describe the world around them. In this example, it's 4 directions. Some communities believe in 6 directions. They would include up and down, and some communities believe in 7 directions. They would include in. But mostly, you'll see this type of medicine wheel. What I want to get to is just reimagining how we look at sustainability, how we look at our environment and our place in it. I'm going to try and switch to my next slide here. Okay. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will say that on the left side, it says the settler colonial tools and analytics will never rebuild indigeneity, meaning that Western philosophy and practices will not get us back to where we were living with the land. When I say we, prior to settlers, the people that lived here. And the Western philosophy of trying to reinvent the wheel, and doing it in a way that they don't include the local people, the local indigenous people. So I think that it's a very basic philosophy, that rather than invent the wheel, why don't you just go talk to the people who lived here for thousands of years and didn't screw the place up when you're looking for solutions on how to treat the land. The Western philosophy of taming nature, of owning our a foreign valued system for to the people that lived here originally. When the Lewis and Clark expedition and subsequent settlers came out here, they saw the beautiful land and they just assumed that it was just here. It was just, that's the way it was here. They couldn't conceive of, because of stereotypes and racism, they couldn't conceive that the Native people were actually managing the land, and that the land cannot survive actually very well without being managed, and that the Natives had long-term traditional fire management practices, traditional growing practices, traditional harvesting practices, and a deeper respect for nature, because they felt and feel that they are part of nature and not above it. Whereas Western philosophies tend to teach us that we are humans and we're superior to everything else in nature and not part of nature, we're above it. I think that that's a dangerous philosophy to have. So I just want to cite a couple examples. Since we were talking about water and land, I wanted to talk, the example of water I wanted to use is Flint, Michigan. And for people that may not be familiar with that, just very briefly, it's just over 200 years ago that the settlers moved into the Flint, Michigan area. And pretty shortly after that, started using the river there as a dumping ground, the trash bin for the city, the growing city. To the point where in the 1950s, the water in the river was so polluted that people couldn't drink it anymore. And the city had to switch its source of drinking water to another city. They had to start paying for the water from another city. And that went on till about a little bit more than 5 years ago, where the state government decided they were going to save money by switching Flint's drinking water back to the river, the polluted river. Once they made that decision, there was one or two things happened. One, they didn't test the water to see how polluted it was and how dangerous it was. Or two, they did test the water, knew how dangerous it was, and switched it back anyway, because the people that were going to be drinking it were poor people. Consequently, they poisoned the water system, have permanently given people permanent brain damage, cost millions and millions of dollars, much more than they would have had to spend on water had they not switched it back. If we look at a native philosophy of the, say, seventh generation principle means that when you make a decision, you will consider how this decision will affect your people in 7 generations. So if the people that had moved to Flint, the settlers that had moved to Flint just over 200 years ago, had employed that philosophy, they would not have started dumping things into the river to pollute it. And if you think about just over 200 years ago, if you think about generation as being 30 years, that's 7 generations ago. So if they had made that decision when they arrived, they would not be in the situation they are in now. And that is a different philosophy about how you treat water, that it's just there for you to do whatever you want. Another example for the land part of this conversation, I want to talk about oak savannas. Now, an oak savanna is a naturally occurring forest that is populated by oak trees. It used to be all up and down the West Coast. We are currently down to below 5% of oak savannas. They've been destroyed. But the natives used the oak savannas as they're basically farms. They would collect the acorns from the trees, and they would plant their crops in between the trees, and the trees would provide shelter and encourage wildlife to come through there, and they could hunt the wildlife. And then every year they would have controlled burns where they would burn down the stalks of the plants they had harvested, and they would burn down. It would keep the pine trees in control. Once that controlled burning stopped, pine trees grew up, outgrew the oaks. The shade didn't allow the oaks to grow, and the land was no longer managed. The result of that is that, and we're going to see it again coming up pretty soon, is when we have fire season, the land out here is not being managed well at all. And so we have these horrific fires, and now we're starting to lose entire towns during the fires. And thousands and thousands of acres and millions of dollars are spent basically because the settlers didn't ask the native people how to take care of this land out here, and still don't. You'll see a little bit of cooperation going on now, but generally the native philosophies are ignored because, like I said, racism and prejudice. They don't believe that native people had science or had stewardship. They just believe that they just existed here and were hunter-gatherers. That's largely caused by racist movies and television programs and a lack of inclusion in the classroom in history. So one thing you can do as for the folks that are listening here is you can ask yourself, how familiar are you with indigenous methods and theories of land management? This is a rhetorical question. I'm not expecting an answer now, but ask yourself that. And then if the answer is, I don't really know anything, then the next question you would ask yourself is, why not? And the why not part is, it's intentional that the dominant culture curriculum ignores natives, and or when they do include natives, it's very stereotypical. So you, as a interested party, are going to have to do self-directed training. Train yourself, read articles, understand how things operated here or wherever you happen to be, because native practices changed with the environment. It's not a one size fits all type of answer there. It really depends on where you are and what kind of environment you're in. So wherever you are, read about how the land was managed. You have to take on that responsibility yourself. Don't expect native people to teach you. You can take classes. I know at Portland State, they have classes on this kind of thing in the Native Studies department. But we have to change our outlook, our world view. And we have to change our value system when it comes to determining what's the best way to engage with nature and to view sustainability and to teach sustainability. And I think that's pretty much my message. Just to be respectful, and working with the Native community can be difficult because of the history of how Natives were treated. So developing relationships is not necessarily easy, but it's necessary. And a lot of government organizations now are starting to hire tribal liaisons. I know the city of Portland has a tribal liaison. Metro's hiring one to try and engage the Native community in when decision-making time happens. But that's pretty rare. That's pretty rare. In most places, government agencies do not. But yeah, I would say it's not going to be easy to develop those relationships, but it's necessary. All right, thanks. I'm just gonna.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for sharing that perspective, for sharing always with us your knowledge from Native American history perspective. Thanks again.
Thank you.